These Violent Delights, Chapter 28. Roma had chosen a seat at the back of the performance room, at a long table that saw visitors to Great World coming and going every few seconds. They would gulp down their drink, slam it down, then be swept back into the audience of the show going on out at the front. They were fast and ferocious and definitely bursting with a dozen different drugs in their system. In contrast, Roma must have appeared downright laden while he sipped from his glass and waited. His hat was pulled low over his face, preventing those around him from looking too closely. If they recognized him, they would start whispering about sighting Roma Montagov watching the sing-song girls, who high-kicked on the stage and dresses slit to their armpits. And heaven knew how his father would react to that. He had warned Roma against Great World since Roma was a child. Warned that places like these, places that teemed with life, pieces of entertainment slotted together with Chinese ingenuity, would corrupt the mind faster than opium. Here, visitors squandered their wages and traded food for forgetting. As much as Great World was looked down upon, it was still a marker of success. Those who still worked in the factories out in Nanxi were not making enough a day's wages for a mere admission ticket. Roma sighed, setting his drink down. With his face shielded, the only person who would be able to find him along the drunken masses and screaming visitors knew exactly where to look. "Hey, stranger." Juliet slid into the diagonal seat, brushing a stray lock of her hair out of her face, melding it back into her curls. She did not mind being identified here, in Great World. She only needed to mind being seen with the air of the White Flowers. Roma kept his gaze on the stage. They were setting up the tightrope now. He wondered how many bones had been broken in this building. "Have a drink," he said, pushing his mostly full cup in their direction. "Is it poisoned?" At that, Roma jerked his eyes to her, horrified. "No." "Missed opportunity, Montagov." Juliet brought it to her reddened lips. She took a sip. "Stop looking at me." Roma looked away. "Did you find anything?" he asked. "Yet to be determined, but—" She checked the pocket watch. Roma wasn't sure where she had pulled it out from, seeing as her dress did not give the appearance of pockets. "I may have something in a few minutes more. You go first." Roma was too exhausted to argue. If the gangsters in the city were constantly as tired as he was, the blood feud would come to a complete halt within the hour. "They're one and the same," Roma said. "The monster, the madness. If we find the monster, we stop the madness." He told her all that had been seen, all that had been deduced. "That is as good as a confirmation," Juliet exclaimed. Noting the volume in her voice had taken, she looked around, then said in a hiss, "We must act." "It has only been seen leaving his apartment," Roma said. "No one has seen Zangutai himself ordering it around. If the monster was seen before where Zangutai lives, he must be controlling it." Juliet would not allow for argument against this. She stabbed a finger down at the table. "Roma, think about it. Think about everything else. This madness keeps growing in waves, and in each wave, it's always a large group who die first before the insects disperse out into the city. The gangsters by the ports, the White Flowers on the ship, the Frenchmen taking dinner, the businessmen outside the Bund." Roma couldn't deny this. He said, "It seems it's always gangsters or merchants who are the initial targets." "And who else would want these specific groups dead?" Juliet went on. "Who else would want to take down the capitalists like this? If Zangutai is responsible, if he has the answers to stopping this all, then why would we waste time in other avenues? But it's useless if he won't talk. We make him talk," Juliet exclaimed. "We hold a damn knife to his throat. We torture him for answers. We have not exhausted every avenue with him yet. He's a communist." It was becoming increasingly hard not to turn to Juliet while they argued back and forth. There was something instinctual about turning toward her, like all the way all living things shift their attention to where there's a loud sound. "He has been trained to keep secrets and take them to the grave. Do you think he is afraid of death?" What was a threat if you didn't mean to carry it through? If they wanted to give him the monster, give him a way to stop the havoc he was causing with the madness, then killing Zangutai did nothing save destroy any chance of the city's salvation. How could they convincingly threaten to kill him if they did not truly wish to? "If he is the only one who can lead us to the monster," Roma went on, "I won't risk us endangering such information. He may prefer to kill himself than to talk. I won't risk Elisa's life on such a bet." Juliet thinned her lips. She was unhappy, he could tell. She would have continued protesting, too, had Scarlet not approached her at that moment, whispering in her ear. Roma stiffened, looking away and pulling his hat lower. It was impossible to hear what the Scarlet was saying over the noise in the expansive room, over the hoots from the audience, over the clinking of the glasses and the popping of the many fireworks exploding on the stage. From the corner of his eye, he watched the Scarlet hand over a large beige-colored file and a smaller note. With a nod from Juliet, the Scarlet left, leaving her to scan the note. Satisfied, she reached into the file, shaking out the papers within. If Roma was reading the text along the side correctly, it said, Shanghai Municipal Police, Arrest File, Archibald Welch. We still have alternative options, Roma said, when it seemed safe to continue their conversation. The Larkspur may tell us exactly what we wish to know, may offer the cure that we seek. If he does not, only then should we resort to torturing Zangutai on how to stop this monster. Agreed? Juliet sighed. Fine. It is my turn to divulge my findings, then. She slid the file across the table. It moved fast, sliding smoothly across the flat surface toward Roma until he slammed his hand down on it. Archibald Welch, Roma read aloud, confirming what he thought he had sighted. A mugshot stared at him, a black and white clipping of a man who was staring ahead blankly, and a vicious scar marring a line from his brow to the corner of his lip. Who is that? Juliet stood from her seat and gestured for them to make their leave. The only delivery man who has the Larkspur's address, and if his history of arrests is any indication, he frequents the most dangerous place in Shanghai every Thursday. Roma quirked a brow. Today is Thursday. Precisely. Despite his efforts, Benedict ended up sitting on a rooftop across from Zangutai's apartment, entering the third hour of their stakeout. It was growing cold. He had accidentally stepped on a puddle on his way up, too, so he was doing his job while hovering in a strange half-crouch, wanting to rest, but not wanting to spread the damp stain on his pants any further. Marshall had laughed himself about how ridiculous Benedict looked. Benedict thought he would never stop, but at least laughter was preferable to silence. At least Marshall's mirth upon Benedict's misfortune was a signal that they should not forget the strangeness that had bloomed between them in the alleyway. Hey, Marshall warned suddenly, pulling Benedict out of his daze. Someone's coming in. Straightening from his ridiculous crouch, Benedict hurried close to the roof's edge. Where he stood, Marshall's eyes narrowed. It's another foreigner, Benedict remarked, leaning back into a sigh. From the location they had chosen, they had a perfect view from the sliding doors that separated Zangutai's living room from his mini balcony. The balcony itself was barely big enough to fit 2 pots of flowers, but the glass doors were wide enough to allow Benedict and Marshall a full view of foreigners coming and going on the hour. It was a mystery. Zangutai wasn't even home. Yet foreigners continued arriving at his door, ushered into the living room by a man who bordered middle-aged into elderly. Ki Ren, his assistant, if Roma's debrief was correct, to sip tea for a few minutes and leave soon after. The buildings in this district were built closely enough so that when the wind didn't howl too heavily, Benedict could strain his ear and pick up bits and pieces of the conversation ongoing inside the living room. Ki Ren's English was not great. Every 2 words he would lapse into Chinese, then start muttering about how much his back hurt. The foreigners, some American, some British, would try to discuss politics or Shanghai's state of affairs, but since none of them managed to get anywhere, it was no surprise they would leave so soon. Why would Zangutai assign his assistant to take these meetings? They all sounded like they wanted something from the Communist Party. Ki Ren sounded like he hardly cared about what they were talking about. He wasn't taking notes or anything of the like to pass on to Zangutai. By now the foreigners who had walked in was already standing, preparing to leave when Ki Ren started to doze mid-sentence. With a roll of his eyes, the white man strolled out of the door, disappearing into the rest of the building, to make his way down the winding staircases. Did you catch that? Marshall asked. Benedict turned to him. He didn't speak for a minute, then, catch what? Honestly, Ben, you're here looking so pensive, and I'm paying more attention than you are. Marshall pretended to chide. Jutting his chin in the direction of the building, he said, He introduced himself as a designated official of the French concession. Scarlet assigned. This is White Flower territory. Do we rough him up? It wasn't a serious question. They didn't have the time to be stirring trouble in the streets. But it did give Benedict an idea to figure out exactly what they had been witnessing all afternoon. Stay here, he told Marshall. Wait, are you really trying to rough him up? Marshall called after him, his eyes wide. Ben! Just stay here, he replied over his shoulder. Benedict moved fast, afraid that he would lose the English-speaking Frenchman. Fortunately, when he rounded the corner to come to the front of Zangutai's apartment complex, the Frenchman was just coming out, busying himself with the buttons on his chest. Benedict grabbed the man and hauled him into the nearby alleyway. Hey! Be quiet, Benedict snapped. What is your business on Whiteflower Land? Why, I'll be, the man hissed. Get your hands off me. Briefly, Benedict wondered if the people coming and going from the apartment had anything to do with the monster business. What if they were all keepers of the creature, giving reports disguised in code to Kiren? But he took one look at the Frenchman and brushed it off. Men this brusque could not pull together such an intricate scheme. Benedict retrieved a knife from the waistband of his pants and pointed it. I asked a question. My business with Zangutai is none of yours, the man replied sharply. He wasn't as scared as he ought to be. Something was changing in this city. You stand on Whiteflower territory. Zangutai cannot save you here. The Frenchman laughed coarsely. It was like he hadn't even noticed the blade aimed at his chest. To him, his neatly pressed suit was as good as a suit of armor. We could invade this entire city if we wished, he spat. We could have this country sign another treaty, hand over all this land. We only refrain because, hey! A policeman blew his whistle from the other end of the alleyway. What's happening over here? Benedict withdrew his knife. He jerked his chin at the Frenchman. Shoo. The Frenchman harumphed and marched off, satisfied that there would be no altercation needing intervention. The policeman walked off too. Benedict was left in the alleyway, bristling in his quiet anger. This would never have happened a few months ago. The settlement officials, the merchants, the foreigners alike, they only grew mighty now because the gangs were weakening. Because the madness was taking their people in droves, collapsing their chains and drilling holes in their structure. They were vultures, all of them, the British and the French and every other newcomer, circling above the city and awaiting the carnage they could gouge themselves until they were full. The Russians had arrived in this country and merged inward, wishing to learn the ways of things to do better. These foreigners had sailed in and grinned at the crime. They looked upon the slowly fracturing pieces before them and knew they only needed to wait for the madness to take its victims. Wait for the political factions to split the city just enough until it was time to swoop in. They did not even have to make their own kill. They only had to wait. Benedict shook his head and hurried out of the alleyway. Learn anything interesting? Marshall asked when Benedict returned. Benedict shook his head. He dusted off his damp pants and dropped into a crouch. See anything interesting? Well, Marshall remarked, no monster sightings, but in my dreadful boredom with your absence, I did notice. He pointed forward, letting Benedict see for himself. What am I looking at? Marshall tutted, then reached out to physically turn Benedict's head, changing the direction of the gaze. There, by the lower left corner of the balcony. Benedict hissed inward. You see it? Yes. There, by the lower left corner of the balcony, a series of angry claw marks trailing down the little ledge.